Act 1. The car nobody wanted. There are cars people dream about, and then there are cars people defend. The first kind show up in posters, on bedroom walls, in the kind of magazines teenage boys hide under mattresses. Ferraris, Mustangs, things with names that sound like Italian curses or American promises. Cars that make strangers stop walking. The second kind, well, the second kind makes strangers cross the street. The little silver 1984 Pontiac Fiero sitting in Eddie Mercer's driveway belonged firmly, stubbornly, defiantly in the second category. The paint had once been bright silver, showroom silver, the kind of silver that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back like a dare. Now it looked more like a refrigerator that had been abandoned behind a bowling alley and left to think about what it had done. The driver's side headlight opened slower than the passenger side, which gave the car a permanently suspicious expression, like it was always squinting at you. The radio worked only when the car hit bumps in the road, which meant the best music always came at the worst moments. And the passenger window had to be held shut with a folded gas receipt from a Shell station in Decatur that Eddie had been carrying in his wallet since October. But Eddie loved it. Not because it was fast, not because it was rare, not because it turned heads. It did, but for all the wrong reasons. Because it was his. He'd bought it 3 years ago from a man named Gerald, who lived 2 towns over and smelled permanently of motor oil and cigarettes. Gerald had listed it in the penny saver for $400. When Eddie showed up with an envelope of saved lawn mowing money, Gerald had looked at him the way adults look at kids who don't know any better yet, with something between pity and respect. He'd shrugged and said, "It's got personality." Eddie had counted out the bills on Gerald's tailgate in the August heat and driven it home at 35 miles per hour because he was too nervous to go faster. Since then, every rattle, every click, every groan from somewhere deep under the hood had become familiar. The car spoke in its own language of complaints and surprises, and Eddie had spent 3 years learning to listen. He knew the difference between the knock that meant low oil and the knock that just meant Tuesday. He knew which gear the shifter liked to stick in on cold mornings. He knew that if you revved it once before turning off the engine, it started easier the next day. Nobody had told him any of that. The car had. Manual windows, 4-speed shifter, no air conditioning, just hot vinyl seats and the particular kind of determination that comes from not having any other option. This was the kind of car that demanded attention and rewarded patience. Not everyone had the patience, but Eddie did. The screen door slammed across the street. Rachel Huang crossed the lawn with a camera around her neck, the old Canon AE-1 she'd inherited from her grandfather and treated like a second heartbeat. She'd lived across the street from Eddie for 4 years, and in that time, she had become the kind of friend who didn't need to knock. She just appeared, usually at the exact right moment. She stopped at the end of the driveway and looked at the Fiero the way a doctor looks at a patient they've given up on, but still like personally. "You actually got it running?" Eddie grinned. "Define running." The Fiero coughed once, a single wet bark from somewhere under the hood, as if answering for itself. Rachel laughed. "That bad?" It only stalled twice today. "Progress." That's what I said. She walked around the car slowly, running one finger along the faded hood, tilting her head at the uneven headlights. She had a way of studying things, people, places, broken down cars. like she was composing a photograph in her mind before she ever raised the camera. "You really trust this thing?" she asked. Eddie looked at the Fiero the way someone looks at a very old dog. Fond, realistic, not even slightly. The summer air buzzed with lawn mowers and the distant percussion of a sprinkler hitting a fence. Somewhere down the block, hamburgers sizzled on someone's grill. A kid on a bicycle wobbled past without looking up. Midwest summer at its finest, slow and golden and a little bit drowsy, like the whole world had eaten too much and just wanted to sit in the shade. Rachel raised the cannon and took a shot of the Fiero without asking. She always did that. Captured things before they changed. She lowered the camera and adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "So, what if we just left?" Eddie looked up. "Left where?" "Anywhere, just west. Road trip." "In this?" "Absolutely in this." Rachel. Eddie. No air conditioning. Character building. The fuel gauge lies. Mystery. The passenger window needs a gas receipt to stay shut. So we stop for gas. She smiled, the kind of smile that already knew it had won. "We're young once, Eddie." The sentence landed differently than he expected. Not like a joke, like something true being said out loud for the first time. Eddie looked at the Fiero. The Fiero idled unevenly, rocking slightly, as if it was shifting its weight from foot to foot. It almost seemed to be waiting. He looked back at Rachel. "How far?" he asked. Rachel pointed west, past the houses, past the water tower, past the edge of everything familiar. No plan. Eddie reached through the open window and grabbed his keys off the seat. "Give me 5 minutes to get my wallet." Act 2. Heat waves and cassette tapes. 2 hours later, the Fiero screamed along at exactly 61 miles per hour. Not by choice, by capability. 61 was the number where the engine found something like peace. Push it to 65, and it started to complain. A high, reedy whine from somewhere near the firewall that Eddie had learned to interpret as a personal affront. Drop below 50, and it got lazy and unresponsive, like a teenager asked to do chores. But 61 was the sweet spot. The Fiero's cruising altitude. Hot air blasted through both open windows. Eddie's elbow rested on the door. Rachel had both feet up on the dashboard, a habit he'd given up arguing with, and her hair was fighting a losing battle with the wind. She laughed anyway. "This is awful. I warned you." "You did. Multiple times." "Noted." She took a photo out the window without looking. "Still glad we came." The cassette deck crackled, which it always did on long drives, then went silent for a moment that felt like held breath, and then came back to life like it had just remembered a responsibility it almost forgot. Summer of '69 filled the cabin, Bryan Adams insisting that those were the best days of his life. Rachel's hand shot out. "Don't touch it." Eddie froze, his fingers an inch from the volume knob. Old cars punished curiosity. Touch the wrong thing at the wrong moment, and you lost the whole signal to static, and it never came back. He knew this. He'd learned it the hard way on the interstate back in April. He moved his hand back to the wheel. Cornfields rolled past on both sides, endless and green and completely indifferent to them. Occasionally, a farmhouse broke the line of the horizon, a grain elevator, a rusted water pump standing alone in a field like it had forgotten what it was for. The land out here had a way of making you feel small without being mean about it. It was just honest. Rachel lowered her camera to her lap and stared at the road ahead. "There's nothing fake in here," she said, almost to herself. "In this car, everything is exactly what it looks like. That's one way to put it. You know what I mean. Nothing is pretending. The dashboard isn't pretending to be anything but plastic. The seats aren't pretending to be leather. The engine isn't pretending to be happy." She paused. "This car tells you the truth." On cue, the car clunked hard. A deep, unhappy sound from somewhere below the center console, like a bowling ball had been dropped into the engine bay. "That sounds expensive," Eddie said. Rachel laughed again, louder this time. They stopped for gas at a station outside a town called Millbrook, population 1100 according to the sign, though someone had spray-painted a question mark after the number. Eddie filled the tank while Rachel went inside and came back with 2 grape sodas and a bag of pork rinds that neither of them really wanted, but both of them ate anyway. They sat on the hood in the shade of the pump canopy, legs dangling, not saying much. The kind of silence that only exists between people who've known each other long enough to not need to fill it. "Where do you think we'll end up?" Rachel asked. Eddie considered this seriously. "Statistically? Broken down on the shoulder of a county highway. Romantically? Somewhere with a good diner." She clinked her soda bottle against his. "I'll take it." Back on the road, the afternoon light started to change. Not dimming exactly, just shifting, the way summer light does around 5 o'clock, when it goes from bright and flat to something richer and more slanted. Everything looked a little more like a painting. Then the sky changed again, faster this time. A wall of dark gray moved in from the northwest, like it had somewhere to be. The cornfield started bending. The temperature dropped 5 degrees in under a minute. Eddie watched the clouds in the rearview mirror and felt the particular unease of someone who has seen Midwest storms before. "That came from nowhere," Rachel said. "They always do out here." Wind hit the car broadside and the Fiero wobbled. Rain followed. Not gradual, not building up to it. Just instantly, completely. Soak in rain. The wipers lurched into action, moving with the exhausted determination of someone who'd been doing this job too long. Thunk, thunk, thunk. "We should pull over," Eddie said. Lightning turned the entire sky white. The thunder came immediately, not the rolling kind, but the sharp, close kind that hits you in the chest. Rachel grabbed the door handle. The Fiero shuddered. The radio crackled and cleared, static giving way to a voice so calm it felt wrong. "July 1984. Temperatures continue breaking records across the Midwest, with forecasters predicting—" Rachel turned slowly. Her voice was careful. Quiet. "Did he say 1984? The gauges on the dashboard swept to the right in unison, all of them, at once, like they'd been grabbed by the same invisible hand. The speedometer hit 120. The temperature gauge buried itself. The fuel needle spun in a full circle. The Fiero lurched forward hard. Then silence. The rain stopped. Not slowing. Not tapering off. Stopped. The road ahead looked different. The asphalt was darker. Newer looking, but somehow older at the same time, if that made any sense. The painted center line was brighter yellow. There were no reflective markers on the shoulders. A car passed them going the other direction. Brand new. Clean off the lot. Windows still wearing dealer stickers. A 1984 Chevrolet Cavalier. Rachel said his name very quietly. Eddie. A glow appeared ahead on the right side of the road. A gas station, the old kind, with a single overhead canopy and a hand-painted price sign on a pole. Gas, $1.12. The Fiero rolled toward it like it knew the way, like it had been here before. Act 3, 1984. The station was called Pearson's. The name was painted in red on the canopy in a font that looked like it had been done by hand, because it had. A Coca-Cola sign hung by the door, the old kind with the ribbon logo. A wire rack outside held maps, paper maps, folded and refolded, for Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, 35 cents each. Everything looked frozen in time. Not old, not vintage, just present. Currently, genuinely 1984. Fresh asphalt, cigarette ads on the windows, a radio somewhere inside playing Jump by Van Halen like it was brand new, because it was. A teenage attendant came out from under a car he'd been working on, wiping his hands on a red rag. He was maybe 17, wearing a Pearson's shirt that was 2 sizes too big, with a name patch that said Kyle. He looked at the Fiero the way you look at something you've seen in a magazine. That the new Pontiac? Eddie nodded, his mouth dry. Yeah, it is. Kyle walked a slow circle around the car with the reverence of someone in a museum. Man, I saw one at the auto show in February. Didn't think they'd look this good in person. He crouched and looked at the side skirt. How's she run? Like a dream, Eddie said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Rachel had gone very still in the passenger seat. Eddie could feel her stillness the way you feel someone holding their breath. Fill it up, Kyle asked. Please. Inside, the station smelled of motor oil and burnt coffee and old wood floors. A rotating display held sunglasses with mirrored lenses and tags that said $4.99. A candy bar rack offered things Eddie hadn't seen since childhood. Every newspaper in the rack read the same date across the top. July 14th, 1984. Rachel stood beside him, staring at the papers. Her voice was barely a sound. We traveled through time. Eddie picked up one of the papers. The headline was about the Olympics. L.A. was getting ready. The paper felt perfectly normal in his hands. The same weight, the same ink smell, the same slight curl at the edges. Nothing about it felt like a prop or a trick. He set it back carefully. I think the Fiero did. They moved through the aisle slowly, like they were walking through something that might break if they moved too fast. Rachel took pictures of everything. The candy rack, a payphone on the wall with a handwritten rate card taped above it, a stand of cassette tapes still in their original shrink wrap. The Pretenders, Cyndi Lauper, Springsteen. These aren't vintage, she whispered. They're new. I know. Eddie, they're new. I know, Rachel. Outside, a man stood leaning against a blue 1984 Corvette parked at the far pump. He was older, late 50s maybe. Silver hair, sunburned forearms, a plain white t-shirt. He wasn't doing anything. Not pumping gas. Not looking at his watch. Just standing there with his arms crossed, watching the Fiero with an expression that wasn't surprise. He was watching it like he'd expected it. Eddie came outside, and the man spoke first. You shouldn't stay long. Eddie stopped. Excuse me. The storm. It opened a road. The man unfolded his arms. Roads like that don't stay open. He looked at the sky to the east, the direction Eddie and Rachel had come from. You've got maybe an hour before the next one closes it again. How do you know about that? The man reached into the breast pocket of his shirt and pulled out a photograph. He held it out, and Eddie took it slowly. It was the Fiero. Older. Rustier. The silver paint almost completely gone, replaced by the brown-orange of weather and time. It was parked at the edge of a lake, gravel lot, cattails in the background. The photo was creased and soft at the edges, like it had been carried for a long time. Eddie turned it over. On the back, in blue ballpoint pen, 4 words. "Don't miss your turn." He looked up. The man was watching him with an expression Eddie couldn't quite read. Not pity, not warning. Something closer to recognition. "Who are you?" Eddie asked. The man smiled, just barely. Someone who knows what that car is capable of. He pushed off the Corvette, reached through the open window, and turned his own ignition. The engine turned over clean and strong. He looked at Eddie one last time through the windshield. "Don't miss your turn," he said again. Then he pulled out of Pearson's and turned east, toward the storm. Rachel appeared at Eddie's shoulder. She'd seen the whole thing. Her camera was up, but she lowered it slowly. "Eddie, that man. Yeah, he looked like... Yeah, I know." Lightning flashed to the east. Not close. Not yet. But building. The storm was coming back. Kyle looked up from the pump. "You folks better get moving. Another cell's coming through." Eddie pocketed the photograph, walked to the driver's side, and got in. Rachel slid in beside him and pulled her door shut, pressing it firmly. No gas receipt needed this time, as if the car was cooperating. He looked at the Fiero's dashboard. All the gauges sat perfectly still, perfectly normal. "Which way?" Rachel asked. Eddie looked east, into the dark. Home. Act 4. The road. Home. The Fiero hit the storm at 61 miles per hour, its speed on its terms. Rain blinded the windshield instantly. The wipers threw themselves back into their rhythm. Thunk, thunk, thunk. And the world outside reduced to gray and white, and the 2 tunnels of light from the headlights, the mismatched headlights, the left one a half-second slower than the right. The gauges swept again. The cassette deck died. The engine surged, pulling hard against something Eddie couldn't see or steer toward. The road seemed to tilt beneath them without actually tilting, and for a long moment, there was nothing outside the windows but white. Then darkness. Then color. The rain stopped. The road was dry. The sky ahead held the last long light of a summer evening, pink at the horizon, fading to purple above. A green highway sign passed overhead. The exit numbers were right. The mile markers matched. A billboard for a car dealership advertised a 2003 model. Rachel exhaled, long and slow and shaking slightly at the end. "We're back." They didn't talk for a long time after that. The kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable but necessary. The way you need quiet after something loud. The road unrolled ahead of them, and the Fiero ran it at 61 miles per hour, steady and unhurried, engine ticking over in that familiar, honest way. The sunset turned the fields gold. Long shadows stretched east across the corn. Somewhere, a hawk circled, riding the last warm air of the day. Eddie reached over and tried the cassette deck. It clicked, whirred, and after a moment landed on something clean and clear. Boys of Summer. The synth opening drifting through the cabin like it had been waiting there the whole time. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Rachel looked at her camera in her lap. She'd taken dozens of photographs. A 1984 gas station, a payphone, shrink-wrapped cassette tapes. newspaper headlines. Kyle in his oversized Pearson's shirt. "Nobody's going to believe us," she said. Eddie thought about that. Probably not. Not even with the photos. No. They'll say we faked them. Yep. She looked out the window. Good. Let them. Eddie laughed, genuinely, suddenly. The kind of laugh that surprises you. Good. He thought about the man at the Corvette. The way he'd said, "Don't miss your turn." Not like a warning, like a reminder. Like something you say to someone who already knows, but might forget. He thought about the photograph in his pocket. The Fiero, older and rusted, at the edge of a lake. Not wrecked, not broken down. Just resting, like it still had places to go. They pulled into Eddie's neighborhood just as the streetlights flickered on. The familiar grid of lawns and driveways and mailboxes looked strange to him in the way that home always looks strange when you've been somewhere impossible and come back. He parked the Fiero in the driveway, turned off the engine. The car shuddered once, settled, and went still. Rachel sat for a moment with her hand on the door. "Same time next week?" Eddie looked at her. "You want to do this again?" "I want to see where else it goes." He looked at the Fiero's dashboard. The fuel gauge needle sat at just below half, which didn't make sense, because they'd started the trip on empty, and he'd only put in $3 at Pearson's in 1984. He decided not to question it. "I'll check the oil," he said. Later, sitting at the kitchen table, Eddie unfolded the photograph one last time. The Fiero at the lake, the cattails, the gravel lot. He'd looked at it 4 times already on the drive home. Each time it was the same. But now, he tilted it toward the lamp. There was something in the background he hadn't noticed before. Something he was certain hadn't been there the first 3 times he looked. A second car, parked just behind the Fiero, half in shadow, half in the kind of clarity that only appears in old photographs when the light hits just right. A blue Corvette. And standing beside it, an older woman, silver-streaked hair, camera around her neck, the same way Rachel always stood.